looks like we're all set up. Uh, hello. Oh, looks like David's here already. And just as everybody comes in, like always, just let me know you're here. Hi, Natalie. As always, we're just gonna wait just a few minutes just to let everybody come on in. But I guess just as we wait, I'll just talk about what we're gonna do today. So, along with, like if you're gonna release a game, you want to make sure that people could play it sort of however they want. Not however they want, obviously, but you want to make sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible. So, in order to do that, you need to be able to, like, okay, like you need to be able to have different control schemes for different things, so all work the same way. So, for example, in this game we have right here, we just have it on the keyboard. So, use WASD to move, the mouse to look around, and just click to attack, just like this. And this is just 100% through the keyboard. Some people prefer to play on a controller, so that's also something we have to account for. Going along with this, if you want to make a game that's dedicated to a specific type of controller, that's also necessary, because you want to make sure the game works on your special controller. But as it is now, you can't really do that. So I'm going to show you how to make it so you can do that. Because right now through the code, we're just doing input.get key down, like whatever, W, and then we walk forward. So it doesn't work the same way like that with special controllers or just controllers in general. So that's why I want to show you this thing today. So that way you'll be able to not only make it accessible for different play types via keyboard or controller, but also for special types of controllers in the event you want to make a game dedicated to a specific type of weird controller. This one event I went to, the game was basically sold around the idea that you could use literally any controller you could think of, and the game will still work. Obviously, the game plays a bit differently depending on what controller you're using. But for example, somebody was playing on a keyboard, somebody was playing on a PS4 controller, and then another person was playing on the DK bongo drums, if you remember those. So what I'm going to show you here is basically exactly that, how to use different controllers. Yeah, it was actually, I played on the drums. Well, Natalie's just laughing at it, but I played on that. It was pretty funny. In order to jump, you had to like yell at the controller because it had a voice recognition thing. It was fun. That was a funny game. but it's been enough time. I'll just get started with how to actually do this. So the first thing we need to do is go to, where is it? File. Oh, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank already. Hold up, we'll find it. Oh, here we go. The package manager. Don't know why I couldn't find that. So we're gonna import the input system. I already have it imported because I wanted to make sure it was all working and everything. So I already have it imported, but just type in input system, it'll pop up over here. You click on it, and right here, it wouldn't say up to date, it'll say import. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna import it. There's gonna be a few pop-ups that come up, just like accept them or whatever. And it's gonna ask you to restart Unity, or it'll just forcibly make you restart Unity. If it doesn't forcibly make you restart Unity, after you install everything, just restart it, just close it out, bring it back up, because otherwise it won't work properly. So that's the first thing you need to do. Just import it, and then restart Unity. And going along with this, another thing I want to talk about is we go to the project settings over here, once we have it all imported, there'll be a setting over here. Okay, so the active input handling. So right now I have it set to both. I think by default, after you import the input system, it'll be on input system preview. I'm not going to turn it to that now, but basically, as you see, there's 3 things here, and I'll just talk about what each of the things are. So input manager, this is just the default input system that's with Unity. So I'm almost 90% sure your game is currently running on input manager. What we just imported is the input system. So these 2 options are basically if you want Unity to exclusively use one or the other, then select whichever one. This is the one we just imported, and this is the default one. Just so that things don't mess up, I just have it on both, so that way, let's say I just forget to set the jump button as I go through this example. It'll still work because it's running off the basic input manager, because, yeah, basically just that. But as we change things, we're going to convert things to the input system as we go along, but I recommend to you guys as well, just so you don't break anything you already have. Just set it to both, just in case you forget something, a certain button you overlooked. Just have it to both, and whatever you have already will be fine, and whatever you convert will just be converted. So that's the next thing to go along with this. So now actually doing something, besides just me explaining some of the backend stuff. Once you have everything imported, just go to your assets folder. It doesn't matter where you put this, but just go to create, and you'll see input actions will now be here. By default that won't be there, but after you import it, it will be. Just do that, and we're gonna have to name it. I'll call this player input controller. So once we have this, we could edit the asset, and this little pop-up will come up. I'm just gonna drag it onto here, just because I think it's nicer over here. And you'll see that there's a few things here, and currently nothing is filled out because we have to fill it out ourselves. There's 3 things: the action map, the actions, and the properties. The action map is basically, you could have like different subsets of button commands. So let's say you want to have each of your scenes dedicated to a different set of input actions. You can dedicate them each here. I personally think you could just all have them on the same map. It really doesn't matter, because you're just identifying different button inputs. But if you want to organize it slightly better, you could have different action maps. So we'll just make one right now. This will just be called player controls. You can name that whatever you want. The name doesn't matter. And then you'll see it just brings up a new action. So the action represents a button input. So you could, if you click on this, you could also name this. We're just going to start off with movement, because I think that's the most noticeable thing to affect right now. So you have movement. You see that there's different properties here. For the most part, you don't need to care about these. I'll show you why you want to use a value later in the stream, but right now we're just doing button inputs, so we'll just leave it at that. These interactions, you don't have to worry about them. This is more like the fancy stuff that you don't really care about. And then once you have that done, you'll see a drop down here. So I guess I'll just go back to the beginning just to reorganize my words better. So this is going to be the action that gets called when a button input happens. So the bindings that are in this dropdown, if any of those happen under the name movement, then it'll do an action based on what you tell it to do. So we could put, let's say we make 4 bindings for WASD. If any of those are pressed, we're just going to check if any of the buttons in movement are pressed, we're going to do something. So by having this lets us make different maps for different controllers and only have it be like one line of code essentially, because you're just going to be like, is anything regarding movement being pressed right now? It doesn't matter if it's on keyboard, if it's on the controller, as long as you're doing a movement action that's defined in these bindings, it'll run the code that associates with that. Obviously, as we progress through the stream and I actually show you how to like input these things, it'll make more sense. But I'm just going to keep being repetitive about this because the system is slightly complicated or just confusing, just the way the layout is. So I'm just going to keep repeating myself so that way you could understand it the best. The default binding we don't need, so we're just going to delete it and we're going to make a new one. So we're going to make a 2D vector composite. There's a few different things here. You don't need to know about all of them, but essentially a binding, this is going to be if you have like a single button input that's just like W, you'll do binding. 1D axis composite, this has a positive and negative component to it. So this is like if you want only a positive and negative thing. Then the 2D vector composite is what we want for this, because as you can see, it has up, down, left, right. That's what we want for movement. Obviously left, up, down, left, and right. And you could also name these. So we could just name it, I'm going to call this one keyboard, because I'm going to start with the keyboard controls, and then I'll show you the controller after. So we go here, keyboard. You could leave these as is, 2D vector. This is what we want. And then now that we're here, this is where we actually start binding things. You associate each of the buttons depending on what it says here. So for up, what happens when we press the like up button, whatever that means in our game. So in our game that means go forward. So the button we have for that if we're using the keyboard is W. So if you click on this little box right here, you see this pop up, and you'll see there's a search bar, a listen button, and just a bunch of things here. If you know specifically what you want, you could just search the name right here. If you're not sure, you could click here and by character, and then just bring down all the different things you could possibly do based on the keyboard. If you want to narrow down, you're not sure exactly what it is. Or there's this handy dandy little thing called listen. So you click on this, it's just going to wait for you to press a button. And once you press a button, it's going to bring up the different options you have regarding that button input. So if I just press the W key, you'll see that there's two options here. There's any key or W. So what we want is W, because when I press the W key, I want it to do something. I want it to go up. But let's say you just want, it doesn't matter what key you press, you just want it to be any key. That's also there. So any key is also an option that comes up because W is part of any key. So we just want W, and we're just going to do that for the rest of them. And you could also just type it in here, D on the keyboard. Left, we want A. And just to show you here, you could also just manually search for it. Although this one looks slightly different. Probably doesn't matter. We'll find out. And D keyboard. I'm not sure why that one's in quotes, but we'll see what happens. So once we have this, we can actually get into the code of things. So first thing we need to do is if you click on our action map in the inspector, you'll see something called generate C# class. You need to check this off and hit apply. Oop, we'll close this. Basically what this does is it makes a script for you here, and this script is going to have all the commands that you put in here, and once it's a script, we're able to access them within the various scripts we have in our game. So you go to player controls, go back here, player controls, generate class, and then hit apply. And another thing to note that I forgot about is it doesn't automatically save by default. So you could check autosave, and every time you change something, it's just going to save for you. I find it to be like a bit laggy when you do that, so I don't turn it on just because it's faster not to. But if you don't turn autosave on, make sure you hit save asset. Otherwise, you'll just be confused later because things aren't going to pop up when you're looking for it. And you'll be like, why? And it's because you didn't save it, so it doesn't remember. Also, I just noticed down is S. So I messed that up. So let's just do S keyboard. Okay, so now we have WASD. And that's fine. And let's save the asset. And let's actually go into the code now and get this working. So if we go to the cat player, because the cat player has the script for movement. I'm going to go here, edit script. First thing we need to do, come up here. Oh, it looks like I forgot to delete it from last time. But in order to actually use stuff, you need to type this in. So you need to do using Unity engine dot input system. If you don't have this imported, you'll be wondering why you can't access any of your stuff. It'll just be an underlined red error. So make sure that's imported. Once you have that imported, the next thing we need to do, make a private, and we come back here. I called it player input controller. This is the script name, player input controller. So we're going to do private player input controller, and we could just call this whatever we want. I'm just going to call it player controller, and sure, that's fine. Now the next thing we need to do to actually make the script identify your input, we need to make a public void awake. Your script might already have awake, depending on how you programmed your thing. Awake is a pretty common built-in function that we have. I guess I should mention that awake is a built-in function. This isn't one I'm just calling awake. Awake is something that just happens in the beginning of the game. When you first run it, it's going to call awake. So that's what awake is. It's similar to start, but awake happens before start. So you can just treat it the same way. But just know that this one happens first. So in here, this is where we're actually going to do some of the logic for things. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set player controller, which we just called right here, is equal to new player input controller. So because we didn't define anything for this to be equal to, we just need to make a new one of it. Like, even though it's of type player input controller, it technically doesn't have a value. So we just have to set a default value to it, which is going to be what we have right here. And once we have that, this next part is slightly complicated. So we'll take it slow, and hopefully I could explain it to you enough for you to understand. But if not, just try to remember the steps I took to get here. But before we do that, I just want to show you something regarding the movement. So right here is where we have the movement for the player. So as you can see, we have input.getAxis horizontal, and then we input those two variables into this vector2. So with our input that we're going to make up there, we're going to make a new vector2, and we're going to set move input equal to our new vector2 instead of the old input system that we have here. So up top, I'm just going to make a new vector2, private vector2, and this is going to be player movement. And now that we have that, let's actually do the programming associated with it. So what we do is we type in player controller, and I'll explain as we go down the line for this. So player controller is this entire thing right here. This entire thing is the player controller. Like, if you remember, when I double clicked on this, it brought up this little window. So this right here is the player controller. So the next thing down the list is going to be our action map, and we called it player controls. So then we're going to do player controls dot, and then you'll also see things pop up as we go along, but I'm just explaining to you now. So we have the player controls, and then the next thing we want is the action associated with player controls. So right now we only have movement, but we could add more in the future. So it's just going to be called movement because we want to check if input for movement is happening right now. So you do dot movement and dot performed. I can't show you this because it's not there, but as the name implies, basically if you press a button associated with movement, if you perform the button input, then we're going to do the next thing that we're doing. You do plus equals, and then this is going to be a variable that you could call whatever you want. A lot of the, what's it called? A lot of the, what's the word I'm looking, documentation associated with the player input called it CTX, and that stands for context. That's just the name they use to associate button inputs with. So the button input is a context. So CTX is just short for context. But like I said, this name doesn't actually matter. You could call it whatever you want. But I'm just going to use the default standard because, I don't know, let's say you get into a big job. Using the same standard names are good because everybody will know what you're trying to reference. And then this next thing, you've probably never seen that before. This is not saying if it's greater than or equal to. It's sort of like a pseudo pointer, if you know what a pointer is. It's basically saying, if you do this button input, we're going to make this button input, we're going to store the information for button input into CTX, which is a name we just made. And then we're going to set that equal to player movement, which we made over here. The vector2 player movement. Player movement. Movement. And we're going to set that equal to, like I said, this is a bit complicated, but I'll explain it once again, once I finish this whole thing. It's equal to CTX dot read value vector2 that. Okay. So now that I have it all written out, I'll explain it one more time, because this is a lot going on. We have plus equal, like all this things. So basically, this button, when this is pressed, we're going to store that data into CTX. And then after that, we're going to say player movement is going to be equal to whatever CTX's value is, like it's vector2. So if we open this up, you'll see we have up, down, left, right. So the vector2 is going to be x and y. Up and down is going to be y, positive and negative. Left and right is going to be x, negative and positive. So what I mean by that is if you press up, the number is going to be positive 1. Down is going to be negative 1. And this is talking about the y value of the vector2. And then left and right is going to be, left is going to be negative x, well, negative 1 for the x value, and right is going to be positive 1 for the x value of the vector2 that is keyboard. Because if you remember, this is type 2D vector. So, hopefully this isn't scaring you away from using this. But all you have to remember, if you don't understand what this does exactly, just remember, we're getting the input here. So you're just going to follow this line. So the player input controller, this is the name of it, then the map, then the action. And then if you perform the input, just do plus equals CTX, because we're going to store the value of that into CTX. And then we can set whatever we want based on that value over here. And I'll show you one more thing you could do that you'll probably enjoy much more doing, because it's slightly less complicated than this, but yeah. If we want to do the movement, we need the vector2, so that's why we need to do all this. So enough of my ranting. We'll go down here to the movement code we have already existing, and we're just going to comment this out because we don't need it anymore. We have our new input thing that we have here. So I lost it. Okay. So instead of doing, I'll just leave it here just in case, but we're going to change it anyway. So instead of horizontal input and vertical input, we're just gonna do movement. I think it's called player movement actually. Player movement. This is just the vector 2 I made up here. Yeah, this one right here, player movement. And because it's a vector 2, you have to define whether it's the x or y of that. So we're just gonna do .x, and then the same thing over here, player movement .y. Okay, pretty sure that's it. So basically, when you press the button, it's gonna get the information associated with that, whether or not you're going forward, back, left, or right. And then for the actual movement portion of this move input variable, we're just going to set that information equal to our new vector 2 instead of the defined one we had before, where we specifically got the input axis, horizontal and vertical. So there's that. One more thing I forgot to do is this is checking to see if you performed the action. You also want to make sure you account for when you're not performing the action. So that's basically the same line of code. So player controller dot player lowercase p dot player controls dot movement dot canceled. This is going along the same logic of this one, but instead of performing the action, when we stop performing the action, we're just going to do the same thing, plus equals ctx player movement, and instead of setting it to the value of ctx, we're just going to set it equal to vector 2 dot 0, which is essentially we're just going to stop moving. Oh, I forgot to put something here. Player movement. Okay, so we're just going to do that. And so when you're doing a button input, the information associated with that button input is going to get stored to player movement. Otherwise, we're just going to zero it out, so we stop moving. So we go back here, and wait for everything to load. Come back here. Yeah, let's hit play. Uh-oh. Let's see, what did I forget to do? Animal controller. Oh! I did forget one very important part. You actually have to turn on. It's a bit weird, because you would assume it would just automatically do it. But you have to make sure you turn on the system we have here, because by default it's not turned on, which I think is weird. So you have to do, is it private? Yeah, private void on enable. So on enable, again, this is different from awake, but basically, once the script is active, pretty much, we're going to make something happen. So what we're going to make happen is we're going to do player controller dot player controls, which again is the name of the action map, dot enable. So we actually have to turn it on. And then I'm just going to copy and paste because it's slightly faster. We also have to make sure it's turned off when it's turned off. It seems a bit redundant, but that's how it is. So hopefully this works now. Okay, so as you can see, I'm moving around, but let's see. Okay, yeah. Natalie is talking more specifically about what the different things are. Yeah, I probably should have been more specific about that. On enable, as Natalie is saying, if you turn a script on and off, these will get called. On enable and on disable. So if mid-game, I were to turn this off, like the frame I turned off this script is the frame this is going to get called, and vice versa. When I turn this on, the frame I turn it back on enable is going to get called. But yeah, for the purposes of this and why I explained it as I did, is basically when you start the game, by default, the script is on. So basically, when you start the game and the script is on, to be more specific, we're going to turn on the player controller like input system thing that we made. But yeah, as Natalie said, what she said is more specific as to what it actually does. So listen to what she said. But okay, so now we have this working. It's like, okay, great. But it's like, that's not a controller. We just did keyboard. But now that we have this base system going, we can now easily add different button inputs. So right now we just have the keyboard, but if you right click on this, we add another vector composite, you'll see it's a subcategory of movement. So right now I have keyboard, and I'm just going to call this one PS4 controller, because I'm going to test it with a PS4 controller right now. So again, these are all subcategories of movement. So if any of these actions are, like, if any of these buttons are pressed, whatever we have here is going to get called. So when we bind the keys for PS4 controller, it's going to run the same exact code. So we no longer have to write any more code concerning the movement script, because we already wrote it. We're just adding new bindings that we also want to do the same thing. So different binding for movement. So if we go here, I have my PS4 controller here. And one thing I do want to mention, which might be good for you to know. If you do input analysis, input debugger, this will pop up. This is all the things you currently have plugged in. I honestly am not sure what pen is. I don't know what pen is, but this is basically all the different devices you currently have plugged in. So if you're not sure why something isn't working, make sure it's here. And then if it's not here, just like try disconnecting your controller and putting it back in. But as you can see, I have DualShock 4, that's the PS4 controller. I have that plugged in, so that's all good. And we're just going to do the same thing we did for this, but with the PS4 controller. So if we click on path, and we go back here, you could just do the listen thing, which honestly I would recommend to do over anything else, because it'll get you the specific thing you're looking for just by pressing it. But just to show you the different things here, if you're not sure, go to gamepad. They have these different things here. These are sort of universal commands. So I don't have an Xbox controller on me to test it with, but these should work the same way if you use these. So button east just refers to, I think the camera's mirrored, so I might have these backwards. But button east would be the circle key button on the PS4 controller, and on Xbox, I think it's also circle. Whatever the right button is over here, that's what button east is. And then up, well, north, south, etc. You understand. And then D-pad is the same thing. The D-pad's over here. It should also work with the Xbox controller, all these D-pad things. And the reason why I bring this up is because if we click on this, go to listen, and I click on the triangle for up, you'll see two different things pop up. There's triangle, which is specific to the PS4 controller, and then there's also button north, which is just a generic thing for all the controllers. So this one is slightly less, I guess, trustable, because it depends on the manufacturer and how they set up the button layout on the controller. So if you want to get specific and specifically set up each controller, you could hard code it to be the triangle for the PS4 exclusively. But if you want it to be for all of them, generally the main controllers, which are pretty much just the PS4 controller and the Xbox, these are all going to be all set up for you. If you have a third-party controller, it might get messed up a bit, so you might want to like set them specifically to what it says here, because they might run a different hardware for how the button input is registered. But I'm going on a rant again, but I just want you to know that. So let's just do button north, just a generic up button, and theoretically it would also work on an Xbox controller. And do the same thing here. Down would be, oh, actually, I'm not even doing the right thing right now. I want to use the D-pad, not the buttons. So what you would do here is listen, and again, you could just hit up on the D-pad, not D-pad, the joystick, and you'll see all this pop up here. This is a bit more complicated because I see a ton of things just popped up, but it's the same thing pretty much. Like, it's separated by gamepad and PS4 controller. So left stick up, gamepad is the one I want. Then listen down, this one, etc. Keep on going, left and right. And then make sure you hit save, unless you have autosave. And then we hit play. And theoretically this should work. Yeah, okay, so as you see, I'm moving this around and the cat is moving with the controller. So it's like, well, I'm not using a controller. And yeah, like I said, I don't have an Xbox controller, but I'm pretty sure it should also work with Xbox controller, because I have gamepad set here, and not specifically PS4 controller. So the next thing I'm going to show you is, like right now we're just using vector. I want to show you how to like do like a button press, because you all have a lot of that in your games. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. This is slightly less complicated. So, but just one more thing, just to repeat myself one more time because it's slightly confusing. All of these are under movement. So if anything associated with any of these, if any of these buttons are pressed that are associated with movement, the movement code is going to get run. Okay, so hopefully you got that. So the next thing we're going to do is make a new action. This one is going to be, let's make the jump button. So jump. Let's binding, get rid of this one. Actually, we could keep this one. So the jump button, we're going to, let's make this one keyboard. I lied. Oh, why can't I make it? Okay. Rename. Okay. Oh, never mind. I can't rename it, but okay, whatever. We're just setting the binding here. So, for jump, we're going to have the space bar, which I guess is this one. Actually, listen, space bar. Okay, there we go. So we're going to set the space bar for jump, and let's also set the button south to jump, so the X button on the PS4 controller. So we'll do this, add binding. Again, this is different from what we did here with the 2D vector composite. 2D vector composite is a 2D vector, as it implies. A binding is just like a single button input. So that's why I could just do that, and it just takes a single button input. So listen, click on X, pops up here, click on that. And now we have that set up, but we actually have to make it work in the code now. So make sure you hit save, as always. And we'll go back here. And what we want to do here is pretty much exactly the same as what we did with everything else. But this one is going to be pretty much one step less complicated than this one. So again, player controller, dot player controls. And one thing I should bring up, because we only have one player map, so this might be confusing to you. If you had more than one player map, you would choose it here. So if you had a second player map, you put the name of that one here. And one thing to also remember is you also have to make sure you turn it on and off in both of these functions if you have more than one player map. I just have the one for player controls. I recommend only having one because you don't really need to have more than one unless you just want to be super organized about it. But I'll stop ranting. What did I call this? Okay, dot jump. And then again, we're going to do this, dot ctx. But this is slightly less complicated because instead of setting a value over here, instead of saying player movement is equal to this vector 2, we're just going to call a function. So we're just going to call the jump function. That's all fine and dandy. Let's see what's wrong. Oh, I forgot to actually. If the input is performed. And you don't have to do canceled because we're just checking to see if it's performed or not. So, like, unlike the vector 2 where you have to change the value of vector 2 like pretty much all the time, this is just a single action thing. So you don't have to worry about that. You could just do it once and you're good to go. And just so you guys know, the jump is a function we already have over here. This is all the logic for jumping. As you can see right here, this is the old code we had for the old input system. I'll just comment this out. Basically, if you press the jump button, which was spacebar before, call the jump function. But instead of doing it here, we're doing it up here. And yeah. So go back here. I think everything should be good. So let's test it out. Pop, pop, pop. Go and hit the spacebar. And you see we jump. Let's go to the controller. Hit the X key. Hold button. And you see we're jumping. So that's cool. But the next thing I want to show you, and hopefully this works because I had to restart Unity before for whatever reason to get the controller to work. So let's see what happens. I have, like I said, this works with custom controllers. So if you have a weird controller on you and you just want to set it up, I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I have this controller, oh god, for this super obscure game I played. So this monstrosity. So obviously this isn't like a popular controller in any name or fashion. So obviously Unity wouldn't have anything set up for it. So like how would we set this up? Because Unity doesn't have, like it's not a PS4 controller, which is well known and already set up with Unity. So if we open up the analysis input debugger, we'll see the things I currently have plugged in. I'm just going to plug in the controller now. You'll see it pops up here. It's called the Virgo Turbocharger. So, okay, it's there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like I said, this is going to work like, so if you have any weird controllers, you could just set it up. Like for David, maybe if you want those mini games to use some really obscure controller, go for it. Why not? So we're just going to add a binding. And like I said, this listen key is really cool. Because I could just press any button on here. So if I just like press this, it's going to be like, oh, this is button 5 on the controller. Actually, I don't know if you actually saw that. Okay, you just trust I hit a button on my controller. So we have that. So when I press this button on the controller, we're going to jump. So like I said, for whatever reason, I had to restart Unity last time. So hopefully this will just work first try. Oh, look, it doesn't work first try. Epic. Okay. Let's see. Let's plug this in. Jump. Nice. Okay. Maybe I have to restart Unity. But I'm not going to do that now. But trust me. Trust me, it works. I don't know why Unity wants me to... I guess like when Unity starts itself up, it checks all the controllers plugged in. But I promise you, I tested it. If you restart Unity, it'll work fine. I'm not going to do that now because it'll just waste time. But that's what I want to show you for that. And one more thing I want to show you is... let's see. Oh, yes. So, we'll see you have this. Well, I guess you can't see it. But doing this, looking around, this is the mouse. I'm currently dragging my mouse around. So, how would you do that? I'm pretty sure David has mouse looking in his game, and so does Emmy. So, I'll show you how to do that right now. So, we're going to make a new one, because there's our regular movement and jump, which is our two different things we have so far. We're going to make a new one. This one is going to be the, I guess I'll just call it look movement. Yeah. Okay. So this one, I'll get rid of this one. Okay, so this one is slightly different. As you can see, this is a button. We're not going to do a button because moving the mouse around isn't a button. If that makes any sense. It's a value. It's called like the delta. Okay. Big words. So we're going to do value. And instead of button, it's going to be... What is it? It's a... I believe it was... Crap. I think it was vector 2. Sure. Okay, we'll see what happens. If it's not vector 2, it's axis. Pretty sure it's a vector 2, though. So, I'm going to add a binding. And this one is slightly more complicated because if you click on listen and then move the mouse around, you'll see it doesn't, like, pick it up. But what you can do is just click on mouse, and delta is what we want. Delta is basically um, like how far the mouse has moved from the last frame, pretty much. So this is how we're going to detect the mouse movement. So we're going to do delta. And we also want to do on here, to look around, I'm going to use the right joystick. So we're going to make a new binding. And this one, I guess I can do this. So the right stick on the gamepad. As you can see, because this is just a binding and not a 2D vector composite, when I move this around, it's not going to give me every single directional input because it's not a vector 2. So it only takes like one singular thing. So just the right stick input. So that's why only one pops up. So we'll do that one. So we have our two things set up, and now we actually have to make it work in the code. Yeah, okay, so let's do that. If we go over here, the script for the camera movement, it's not in the cat animal controller. It's on the camera, which is this one. So because it's on a new script, we have to do a lot of the stuff we did before over again. So player controller, I'm just going to copy and paste a lot of this because all of this is almost exactly the same. So go here, make sure you re-import using Unity Engine dot input system. If that's not there, it's not going to work. And we'll just put it right here. So we need this because this is this. So if we want to use it, we have to import it. Instead of player movement, it's going to be, I'll call it look direction. Snowy blue. Oh, hi Tayshawn. How are you? We're just talking about doing controller. Okay, I'll talk about doing player controls. Not player controls. Controller controls for your games. So it's a little bit complicated. So you'll probably be a bit confused. You could rewatch the stream if you want to learn about it. But I'm just going to continue on now. We'll call this one look direction. And we'll just get rid of these because we're going to rewrite these. So player, what we're going to do for this one is player controller dot player controls dot look. Oh, wait. One thing I forgot to do. I forgot to hit save. So I guess I'll just show you here. If I type in look direction, you'll see it doesn't come up. That's because I didn't hit save. So we'll hit save. And go back here. So when I type it in, okay, like now it pops up. So if I perform that action, we're going to do plus equals ctx, this little pointer thing. We're going to set look direction equal to ctx dot read value vector 2. Okay, so this is pretty much exactly the same as the other vector 2 we have, but just the how it gets the input is slightly different because using mouse delta, which is different from the 4-axis we have here, but the code for it is still pretty much the same. Okay, so I think that's everything for this. And I'm just going to copy this, go down to where we do this, which is right here. So over here, as you can see, we're getting the mouse input. So input.getAxis mouse x. We don't want that. We're going to put our own thing in here. Get rid of that. And we'll put, so instead of this, instead of mouse delta x, which is here, we're going to use our look direction. So look direction dot x and look direction dot y. And also down here it's used one more time. And that, as you saw, this is the x it wants. So do that, look direction dot x. So I believe that's everything. Let's see, I don't think I forgot something. It should be good. So as you can see, I commented out the old way. So let's get this running, see if it works. Okay, so I can see we're moving around. You may not be able to tell. Oh, I guess. Oop, look at that. Yeah, wait. Let me calm down. Okay. As you can see, look. See how it keeps on going? That's because I forgot to do dot canceled. So just if you want to see what happens if you don't put canceled, this is what this is why you have to do that. And what I mean is, if you go here, remember how I did canceled, and we're gonna set it to 0. What you just saw is what happens if you forget to do that. So, in case you're curious, put this here. Boop boop. Canceled. And we're just gonna set this equal to vector boop, vector2.0. Okay. So let's try it again. Okay, so it's nice and good. See the controller. Go to controller. See it works nice and fine. So we can now pretty much use the controller 100%. I don't know if you can see this good. I'm definitely not going to be able to control this good this way, but you get the gist of it. It's like, oh look, we're using a controller. But also, if I were to use the keyboard, it still works all fine. So, whoa, isn't that cool? So, that's that. Yeah. Okay. What else is there? Oh, let's do the attack. We don't have attacking yet. We should probably do that. So let's do attack. Click plus, hit the plus button over here, and let's call this one attack. Again, this is just a single button, so we could just do a single binding here. Attack used to be left click on mouse. Oh, would you look at that? So apparently, listen doesn't. What is that? Okay, never mind. So listen doesn't work with mouse click. I just found that out. So let's go to mouse. And you'll see, that's why I also want to show you this, because if it doesn't work on listen, we could just search for it ourselves. So we'll go to mouse. I'm almost certain left button is left click. So let's do left button. And for here, let's just set it equal to the square on the PS4 controller. So again, just hit plus, add binding, click here, listen, hit the square button, which is button west if you want it to be universal for the Xbox as well. Yeah, so we have that. Now let's actually get it working in the game. Make sure you hit save. Okay, so back in the animal controller. Let's see if we have an attack function. Let's see, where's the attack? We'll find it. Let's see. Ooh. Control F. Mouse. Okay. What's wrong with this direction? Okay, I must have accidentally deleted that. But let's see if I could find where you actually attack. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Okay. So right here, this is the attack. So, what we'll do, as you can see, this is good that it's like this because this is good for your games as well. I don't have a function for this yet. So, what we'll do, we'll take this, take it out. Let's make an attack function. And also, this is sort of it sort of enforces a better programming mindset, I guess, is the word I'm looking for, because you sort of want to make a function, not for everything, obviously, but it's good to have as many separate things and separate components as possible, just because it's easiest to debug your game that way. If you have a problem with your game, if you have just everything in update, like, there's a lot here, but whatever. Like, if you have all this here, it's like, where's the thing that's broken that I'm looking for? It could just get lost in here if you just have everything in the same function. So sort of having their own functions for everything allows you to easily identify what the issue is. So if I'm having problems attacking, I just be like, okay, let's go to the attack function to see what's wrong. So just a little programming tip or whatever. Try to separate things where possible into these different functions. So the code is going to be pretty much exactly the same, but instead of this code is only going to get called when we call it up there. So we could get rid of this. And this if statement still applies, because when I hit the attack button, if the current cooldown is not below 0, we're just not going to do the attack, because it's in the if statement. So the code is still going to work exactly the same. We're just reorganizing it into a function. So now that we have it as a separate function, let's go back to the top. And the code will be relatively the same as this one here, but slightly different. So player controller dot player controls dot attack dot performed plus equals ctx boop, boop, bop, attack. Okay, nice. So it's as simple or complicated as that. So let's see if it actually works. We'll hit play. So if I click, okay, you can probably hear it. So I'm clicking the mouse button, works fine. Let's see, I hit the square button, it works fine. So let's go walk up to this. Okay, let's go to these. Oh. Whatever, you get the gist. Oh, question, okay, let's see. Do you think people should do this controller setup at the very beginning? Like theoretically, yes, it is. No, I got it. So theoretically, it's good to do everything from the offset. If you have like a clear plan of how you want everything to be, obviously as you go about writing your code, having all that in the back of your mind is going to enable you to write sort of cleaner code how you want. So like what we're doing right now, it's not a huge deal to just be like, oh, let's make a function for this, because yeah, let's make a function for this. But if let's say it wasn't as simple as this line code right here, if I didn't have this in the back of my mind when I started writing this code, like the system might have to be set up differently, just based on how the input system works, or if we just wrote it a really obscure way. Going back and trying to implement how we used to have it with the new input system, it might cause some issues. In this case, it didn't cause any issues. Like it was just, like I said, just this one if statement. As long as the cooldown is below 0, do the attack. How do I do this with all... Okay, so all the raycast logic, that is specifically on the camera and the way the camera is looking. So if we go here to the camera controller, you'll see I just move the camera like this. So you would have to find wherever the similar code is for this in your project. The code should be almost exactly this here. You would just have to replace that with this, let's go back here, with the look movement. So the mouse delta, you would have to replace it with that and put it here. As for the raycast logic, like I said before, the raycast logic is coming out of the camera and the way the camera is looking. So as long as you could just get the camera to move with the mouse, which you should be able to do just by replacing this with this, the code, like I said, will be relatively the same. It'll just work exactly as it usually does, because the raycast isn't based on the input, it's based on where the camera is looking. Picking up things. So what you can do, I'm not sure exactly what your code looks like, but what you can do is, like I'm not sure if you're keeping track of, like you have a boolean or something for if you're holding something or not, but in the function for picking things up, you would shoot the raycast out in that function, because it only matters that one frame. So in that function, you shoot the raycast out. If it hits, let's say like the Clorox bottle. So you shoot the raycast out in your new function. So let's just write private void test or whatever. Okay. Oh, not teased. So what you do, you would shoot out the raycast right there. You would set the bottle position, and this might be slightly different from what you have. I'm just assuming what you're doing. So I'm assuming you're going to shoot the raycast. If it hits the bottle, you're going to set the bottle to be like in your hand. So you just put that right here. You could also set a boolean for like I'm holding the bottle. I don't know if that's what you have, but you can do something like this. So we shoot the raycast. If you hit something, so this would all be in like an if statement in here. Pretend the indented is an if statement. You would set the bottle position. You would set a boolean that's like I'm currently holding this, and then let's say you hit the drop bottle button, then you would be private void drop bottle, and then you would put the associated logic with dropping the bottle here. You would set that bool to false to say I'm not holding the bottle anymore. Like I said, I don't know exactly what your code looks like. I can open your project after the stream's over, just check everything out to see if everything should work fine. Or if you have any problems, you could always just email me. I'll send my email here. Yeah, okay. So I'll put my email right there. If you have any problems setting this up, I'll try to help you out. But this should be just the basic logic of how it works. From what I'm assuming you're doing. So you're going to shoot the raycast. If you hit the bottle, set the bottle position, then say I'm holding the bottle. Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't actually pulled your project, so I'm not sure if I can. I haven't checked. But, yeah. Yeah, and then you might also have some other logic like shoot, I guess. So public void shoot. So obviously this would be in an if statement. So if bool for holding the bottle is true, then you would run the shoot logic in this function in that if statement. I think that would be everything, just from how I'm thinking it works. You would also put here like if there's ammo, ammo minus minus, you would lower the ammo there. Yeah, I believe that should be everything. Just from what I'm thinking you did. So, the food boxes. What about the food boxes? Because I believe that should be the same thing pretty much. Which is you shoot the raycast. If you hit the box, mouse down and mouse up. Mouse down, mouse up. Okay, so I believe I can test it out right now actually. If we do, go back here. If we do player controller dot player controls dot jump dot cancelled plus equals ctx, we're just going to do the same logic for jumping. Put this here. I believe canceled should be on mouse up. I could be mistaken, and if I am mistaken, I'll email you separately about how to go about doing this, because I'm not sure off the top of my head. Let's see. So, hit play. So we're gonna jump. I'm on the ground, I let go. Yes, it is like that. So I hit jump, I'm still holding the button down. and once I let go of the button, it jumps again. The reason it jumps again is because it's calling this one. So the first one, when I press it down, is performed, and canceled is on release. So thank you for bringing that up. I honestly overlooked that as I was going through this, but canceled is the same as on button down. No, on button up. So you could do your logic like that as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about that, but that's nice to know as well. Let me know if you have any other questions, because that is wrapping everything up. That's all I wanted to show you guys with the input system. Again, it's a bit much, so you might have to refer to the stream again as you run through your code. But that should be that. I'll just sit here just for 1 or 2 more minutes. If you have any more questions, just let me know. Yeah. Like I said, setting this up is pretty annoying and complex. But once it's set up, like once I have this movement here, like we could just add all these different inputs. So theoretically, I could just add like 10 more, and it would still work the same exact way, as long as I put the input in correctly. Like if I wanted to, I could add arrow key controls. So it is a very nice system, but like I said, it's a bit complicated to set up. This code here is confusing just to look at, but it seems like there's no other questions, so that's all I have for today. So thank you for watching. David, as I said, if you have any problems, feel free to contact me. I don't mind answering your questions, so goodbye.